Chris and Chris Talk Movies.
Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. My name is Chris Ferry, and this is my co-host.
I am Chris Huddleston.
And today, we're going to have a super fun time talking about the 1985, I believe?
85.
1985 thriller chiller, Fright Night.
What would you do if you accidentally discovered the house next door was occupied by something not human? Something horrifying. Something unspeakably evil. No one believes you.
Mom, I didn't have a nightmare.
Not your
They
mom.
did kill a girl over there.
Not your girlfriend.
Charlie, is this some sort of a trick to get me back?
Not even the police.
Look, I know it's crazy. I know that, but look, Lieutenant!
It knows that you know. You'll do anything to protect yourself. But it will do anything to protect its secret. Fright Night. If you love being scared, this could be the night of your life.
Okay, great old school trailer. Chris, do you have a synopsis for us?
I do. So, as you said, Fright Night came out in 1985. It was written and directed by Tom Holland. This was the first film that he directed. And it stars Chris Sarandon, William Ragsdale, Amanda Bierce, Roddy McDowall, and Stephen Jeffries. And it is a tale of Charlie Brewster. He's a high school kid who has a kind of an active imagination and is into watching old school horror movies. And he has a neighbor or a couple of neighbors move in next door, and he is convinced that the neighbor, whose name is Jerry Dandridge, is a vampire. No one believes him. You know, all of his friends and family think he's crazy. Ultimately, he approaches this horror host named Peter Vincent, played by Roddy McDowall, to help him out. Peter Vincent doesn't believe him. His girlfriend, Charlie's girlfriend, Amy, and his buddy Ed, Evil Ed, pay Peter Vincent to go to the neighbor's house and do a vampire test to prove that he's not a vampire. And when they get there, Peter Vincent realizes that he has no reflection. And so then he is convinced, and ultimately his friends become convinced as well. And kind of the rest of the movie is them battling this neighbor vampire.
Right.
So this was a movie that I've seen several times over the years. I don't know how many exactly, but this was a first time watch for you, right?
First time,
All
had
right.
not seen it, and I liked it. I
Good.
enjoyed it. It's a lot of fun. It got, took me a little while for it to kind of crank up,
Mm-hmm.
because just from the trailer, you know what's going to happen. We know that Charlie is not crazy. I mean, heck, from the movie poster, you know it. The whole pitch of the film is like, what if everyone thought you were crazy because you knew there was a vampire next door and they didn't believe you? So,
Right.
So for the whole first half of the movie, like it's just frustrating because we know he's right,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a couple of like weird near misses where, he comes in contact with the vampire, and we think that the vampire's just going to kill him, but it's like oh, here comes mom. And for whatever reason, the vampire doesn't want to be discovered, I
That really
guess.
made me laugh, watching it again
It's just
this
sort of like,
time.
I'll see you later, kid. And you're like, we just kill them all. I was, what do you
Yeah,
care?
yeah.
But so there's a number of those like that feel like junior high or high school movie logic where it's like, oh, if this cop wasn't standing here, you'd be getting you just kind of like
I
okay,
guess you
you
could.
just
I
go
guess
with
you
it.
could. I guess you could. Kind of spin it as he's trying to draw as little attention as possible, but he's killing prostitutes, and
Right.
he has no concern really about killing this teenager. He just doesn't want to kill his mom for whatever reason.
Right. Yeah. It's there's a bit of that. But there's a lot of really great stuff in the movie, and I think about halfway through, it really picks up. And I particularly enjoyed. Okay, so there's a couple of different categories I want to talk about, and I guess I'll start with. Let me see if I can spell them all out. So one is the hardest to quantify, which is like a kind of a dialogue and directing and acting style that even though it was 85, it felt like older Hollywood somehow. Like,
Mhm.
so I'll come back to that. That I thought was it was a little distracting. And then I want to talk about sort of sexual themes, which
Sure.
I found really one of my I mean, it sounds weird to say. It was one of my favorite parts of the film because it felt really dangerous to have the vampire, who is a fully grown adult, male, um, sort of seducing Charlie's. That's his name, right? Charlie.
Yes, Charlie.
Girlfriend, and they're seniors, but she reads young. Like it feels really racy, like really
Yeah, they
kind of
never
intense.
say what. There's very, very little, just very brief stuff with them at school, but you never get any indication as far as what age they are
But they're
exactly.
definitely in high school.
Yeah, they're definitely in high school, but they could be 16 or they could be 18. You don't really know.
We know that they're sort of right at the sexual theme, and I want to just come back to it for a second because the third thing I want to talk about is the practical effects,
Hmm.
which are really fun. But as long as we're talking about the sexual themes thing, let's just start on there because the movie starts with him making out with his girlfriend in their bedroom, and um, the strong implication is that they're both virgins because she's reluctant to kind of go all the way, and she's nervous, and so is he.
Hmm.
He's very into her. So, I mean, they could be 18 at that age, but that's why it even makes me feel like it skews younger. Like they might be 16 or 17.
Right.
And when the vampire full on starts messing with them, like when they all kind of decide to go after him to destroy him, um, he gets between Charlie and the girlfriend in a nightclub and uses his like vampire hypnotic powers on her. And they're out on the dance floor and they do I mean, it's all PG, but it's a very sexually charged dance on the dance floor together.
Hmm.
And then he gets her back to his house where she's sort of on a bearskin rug in this sort of Marilyn Monroe dress, and he bites her on the neck. But, as it is with vampires, it's extremely eroticized.
Yeah.
And I just kept thinking, like, this is crazy. She's like 16 or something like that. So I love that it had that sense of danger to it.
And she changes as well from this kind of,
Yeah.
teen girl with this short hair to where her hair becomes longer, and there were a couple of scenes where I was like, is this the same actor? Did they, you know what I mean? Because she looks so much different. Her hair's longer, and she has contacts in and everything. And a couple of scenes I was like, did they use somebody else? You know what I mean? And I don't think it was. Then she would speak and be like, okay, it's the same actor, but they definitely, you know, uh, sexualized her, kind of changed her from kind of, just this teenage girl to now she looks like a woman and she has this slinky dress on, and all of that. But yeah, there's that scene where he bites her and, they play this. It's very, I would say the most dated aspect of this is probably the music, the fashion a little bit too, but yeah, he bites her and, she you don't see her nude body or anything, but her back is uncovered and you just see the blood, like 2 or 3 trickles of blood run down her back. It's really neat the way it's shot, but it's like you said, it's very sexualized.
Well, a lot of these films from the 80s that we're revisiting, or this is right in line with that, where the sort of ratings code was pretty literal. Like, you can only show this or so much of that before it tips over into an R rating.
Mm-hmm.
You can only have so many curses, and they all had different weight. So this doesn't cross a line visually on screen. You don't see bared breasts, for example. You don't see, you know what I mean?
There is once where, and this was an R, but there's one where he's
one
looking,
of the victims.
Yeah, he's looking. Charlie is spying on the guy all the time, and he has binoculars and he's looking through the window. And
right,
Jerry Dandridge has this girl in there, and he takes her top off, and I think that was kind of like
right.
Well, it's the 80s. We got to get boobs in there.
I don't know if voyeurism was a thing in the 80s, but it was a thing in 80s movies. Like,
sure.
That's a very common trope of, like, somebody is looking through a window and watching someone else undress or watching 2 other people be intimate. I remember that came up so much in the 80s, and it made me wonder, like, was voyeurism just more of a thing, or why was that the constant repeat?
That's an interesting thought. There's probably somebody has analyzed that or something. I mean, there's probably like somebody has written a paper or something about voyeurism in 80s films or something. But yeah.
And then the other thought that I thought was interesting, and maybe I'm curious to hear if this resonated with you. So the vampire has a friend
Mm-hmm.
that lives with him. That is, he is not a vampire, I don't think, but he's some sort of, he is supernatural, because he takes bullets to the chest and he takes a lot of abuse and
he's like his Renfield or something like that,
Yeah, but he's something more than just a hypnotized human. He defies, he's not exactly a zombie, but he certainly gets shot multiple times right in the chest and then sort of gets back up and keeps coming.
Mm-hmm.
And it's never really defined what their relationship is, but I read it as that it's a very bisexual, like the vampire is kind of pansexual. The vampire is kind of, something about his interactions and the kind of knowing looks they exchange had an intimacy that made me think that this vampire kind of goes both ways, and it doesn't get too hung up on that. Did you get that vibe at all, or am I bringing all of that to the screen?
I wasn't. I've never picked up on it too much watching the movie, but I was reading some stuff about it today, and they said that I've read some quotes from Chris Sarandon, who plays the vampire, and he said he only took it as just, again, he was his Renfield or whatever, he was his servant or his helper or whatever. But he said that the director definitely had intended it to be like there was some, he specifically said that it was supposed to be homoerotic, that definitely supposed to be, the inclination was that, they had an actual relationship. And as you said, he was into women, he was into him.
Yeah. There's nothing on screen explicitly, you never see them holding hands even or making out or anything. It's just something in the way that they sort of, Charlie would come in and the 2 of them would look at each other, and there was just something knowing in that. That doesn't surprise me that the director was going for that, because I saw it on the screen and I thought it made, certainly in 85, I thought it made it a slightly more interesting film. Charlie would have been, if Charlie is your typical 1985, male teenager, that would have probably made me feel uncomfortable if I wouldn't have even come up on my radar when I was that age. What did I know about it? But
Sure.
I just felt like that was deliberate, and I wondered if I was imagining it.
Like I say, on the my understanding was on the director's part, it definitely was, but Chris Sarandon said he didn't really feel, and they said that the director came from a theater background, and he said, and you can tell me if this is a common thing in theater, but he said they had 2 weeks to rehearse, and before they actually filmed the movie, they did an entire run through of the script where they did it just like a play. And he told the actors to write their own backstories for their characters. And some of that a little bit here and there, I guess they kind of added into the movie, things that weren't actually in the script, that you were their own views of the makeup of their characters. Yeah. Which, and like I say, Chris Sarandon, he didn't feel there was any kind of a gay aspect with him and the other guy. But what I did feel like there was definitely some of that going on. So Ed, the evil Ed, so Charlie's friend, is this just kind of strange, weirdo kid. And they don't really delve into it too much that, he's bullied or anything like that, but he's just a strange kid. Well, the vampire turns him at one point. Like they get separated, and the vampire shows up as Ed is like going through this alleyway to get back to his house. And the Jerry, the vampire, he stops Ed and he tells him that he can take him away from all the pain and the suffering that he's going through. And
another type of seduction, really.
Exactly, yeah. And Ed reaches out his hand, and he takes his hand, and then the implication is that he bites him. And I felt like that was much more of a, if you want to use the term, homoerotic kind of scene than anything was between Jerry and the guy that lives with him. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't feel like there was, not that it's a problem, but I didn't feel like there was anything in the film that was, to use the term, that was homoerotic.
Mm-hmm.
The only eroticism we see in the film is really between the vampire and the girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know whether that was just to keep things clearer or to kind of keep the story moving forward, or just because audiences might have, didn't feel audiences were quite ready for actual homoeroticism on film. I don't know, but
yeah,
I do think that this theme of seduction, like what is the vampire's action? The vampire seduces and then he feeds, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he seduces, I mean, a prostitute, I guess you're not really seducing somebody, but he entices them, you know what I mean? It's about the seduction as much as anything else. And then he drinks their blood. And I guess with the case of the prostitutes, he simply kills them. But with Evil and the girlfriend, I mean, he chooses to turn certain people for Machiavellian reasons.
Yeah, so he can use them. And I've always felt that scene with I don't mean to interrupt you, but just I've always thought that scene with Evil Ed is, that scene is handled really well, where he turns him. It's really kind of touching, because he cries and he's, it's basically like, it's kind of this powerless kid, and now it's like, okay, you're going to have power now, and there won't be any pain anymore. And I've always thought that, ever since even when I saw it the first time as a kid, and even now as an adult, I think it holds up well. I mean, it's a very brief scene, but I've just always thought it's kind of touching. I mean, it's creepy in a way because he's turning him into a monster, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think to me, what I like, this had a lot, played around with a lot of what I like about vampires and vampire movies. It's not, for me, the fear of being bitten, but it's the exploration of like, so what is scary about a vampire, right? Is a vampire fundamentally seductive? Is a vampire fundamentally voracious? Is a vampire fundamentally sadistic? It's like when people portray vampires, directors and writers, it's like, what is their core? I mean, vampires are all of these things, but what is their core? It's like with zombies. Are they fast zombies? Are they slow zombies? Are they smart zombies? Are they, you know what I mean?
Mhm.
You have some carte blanche to play with the archetype, and I think it's more interesting when, like, hunger is a common one. The fundamental vampire drive is hunger, and here it felt like the fundamental drive of this vampire was more about control.
Mhm.
It was self-preservation because he didn't want to be discovered. And I liked also that they gave him classic vampire vulnerabilities, right? So if you were a true believer and you held up a cross, that had real power against this vampire.
Right.
And I
Mhm.
think frequently they're kind of indomitable. Like, they're faster than you, they're smarter than you, they can, it's like, what chance do you really have?
Yeah.
But this one, I guess we didn't actually see him respond to garlic, but he was afraid of holy water. He recoiled when people held up a cross. He was vulnerable to daylight, like all of the classic things.
Right.
And I thought that gave them, you think like, well, they don't have much of a chance, but there are things they can do to at least protect themselves.
Mhm.
And that made a more interesting movie. Like, contemporary vampires don't seem to have many vulnerabilities. And I like that this one did.
Yeah. Yeah, they used the definitely the old school kind of, they didn't really try to reinvent the wheel as far as, it was an old school vampire story in a contemporary for the time setting.
Yeah, yeah, and that felt interesting in the 80s. Like, he'd be like, "What are you gonna do, Charlie?" And as he's advancing on him, like playing with his food, Charlie whips out this wooden cross, and the vampire responds in this wonderful, like, old school. He's like, "Ah!"
Yeah.
recoils, and it's like, "Oh yeah, that's so much fun!" Like,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
so great that the vampire is like this causes the vampire physical pain beholding this cross.
Yeah.
I love that.
Oh yeah, it's great. And the thing with, you were talking about zombies, which you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I think, vampire stories are interesting because a zombies, nobody wants to be a zombie, right? That's, whereas a vampire, there's always this double-sided thing of, it's like, well, you're scared of them, but it's also they're seductive because it's, the vampire's trying to kill some people, but he's trying to sell some other people on the idea of, hey, you can be immortal and you can be powerful, and that's, and who doesn't think, oh, it would be really great to live forever, but it's this idea of, obviously nobody can. So I've always thought that's interesting with vampire stories, that the vampire is not, this guy, he's this handsome guy, and it's not until he's shown the cross, or it's something happens that he gets hurt or something like that, that you kind of see his true form. But he's very seductive to, especially to Amy, the girlfriend, is immediately attracted to him the first time that she sees him. So again, it's not like some other creature that you're going to instantly be terrified of,
And it's a stacked deck. I mean, he's a good-looking guy, and we see that this teenage girl, does think like, "Vavoom, who is that?"
Yeah.
But then when he turns his powers on her, it's clear that it's not simply like he is manipulating her.
Right.
You know, he's putting her in sort of a trance that she kind of comes in and out of. But, you know, the minute he sort of makes eye contact with her again, it's not like she's fighting it per se, like she's putty in his hands. And I think that makes him, I like the way they establish his powers and the way they establish his weaknesses, because in certain contexts, he seems overwhelmingly powerful, but he's not Superman, right? I mean,
Yeah.
he's strong and he's fast and he can turn into mist and all these crazy comic booky things that make him like really a daunting opponent, but he is not invulnerable.
Charlie stabs him through the hand with a pencil and really,
Yeah.
really hurts him, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right.
So, so just before we get to the practical effects, which I think are kind of a fun third thing to talk about, I want to talk about a little bit the beginning. And like I thought she was terrific. I mean, I think the vampire was terrific. I thought I see the guy that plays Evil Ed is so weird.
It's almost like on all 80s stories you had to have, or 80s movies,
geek,
you had to
some
have a
freak.
weird sidekick, you know, that's awkward. And yeah.
And his performance didn't really even fit into any of those boxes. I mean, his performance was so odd. I found him mostly annoying. Like I just found him really irritating. But then there were those moments like when just before when the vampire had him cornered in that alley, the kind of he's running down an alley. I'm like, where are they? He's in this labyrinth of like blind alleys until he runs down an alley that terminates in a brick wall. I'm like, who built this alley? Why is this here? Right? This doesn't exist in the real world. But his performance in that moment really is genuinely touching. Like his fear but also you see the vampire seduction of him in that moment would not have worked if you didn't really read the pain in his eyes, the temptation of nobody's going to hurt you anymore. I'm going to make you powerful. I'm going to make you, we got to cross this little line of death. You know, I'm going to bite you and that's going to hurt. And then you're going to die, but you're going to be reborn as something, a butterfly, so much better, that no one's going to be able to stop you. And the fear mixed with the temptation of that, he doesn't have lines, it's really plays out on his face and you're like, that's acting like that. Kind of makes his performance in the movie for me, because once he's a monster, all of that kind of gibbering, cackling stuff is really scary. They give him these bonkers prosthetic teeth and, and they really make him look like a monster. And he has this sort of very falsetto, sort of screeching, cackling voice and laugh. And all of that works when he was a monster. When he's a high school student, I'm like, oh my, please be quiet. You're so irritating. So that kind of leads me into, I was just going to say, I never really connected with Charlie, the protagonist himself, that you think, the audience has to like the protagonist and I never really liked Charlie all that much. I mean, he didn't drive me insane, but I didn't really care what happened to Charlie. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, and he kind of has he kind of has one note, which is just being sort of hysterical all the time, because he's just running around trying to convince everybody that this guy's a vampire, and nobody's listening to him, and he just seems kind of ridiculous. And he's also, he's kind of just trying to pressure Amy into having sex with him, and he seems, not that that's not a common teenage boy kind of a thing, but
Well, but if you don't care, if you're not standing in the protagonist's shoes, right? If you're not rooting for the protagonist,
Right.
it just seems kind of, you're like, oh, come on, Amy, come on. You're just like, leave her alone, man. She said no, but if you feel like it's you, then that kind of, post Me Too, all of these movies feel,
They all seem kind of strange.
you're just like,
Yeah.
she
For it.
said no, she's not ready for it, but in the 80s, that was just, in these 80 movies, that was just, you go back and watch them now and you're like, oh my God, jeez.
For sure, for sure. I think
but I
when
played
things really... Go ahead.
I was gonna say, I played a little game with myself, and I'm like, I can't put my finger in like a bumper sticker sentence on why Charlie wasn't working for me. And I thought of like, well, who could I have cast in this? And I thought, I don't know, Emilio Estevez or
You know what? It's funny that you said that, because another thing that I was reading about today, Charlie Sheen actually auditioned for this and didn't get it. I think
he did
Charlie
the
Sheen...
Wraith. He did the Wraith instead.
He did the Wraith instead, yeah. I think Charlie Sheen would have been too cool. I think, not that Charlie Sheen isn't a good enough actor that he could have done it, but I think you want somebody a little bit kind of nerdy in there, and I think he would.
Well, I thought Tom Cruise, young Tom Cruise, like I think Risky Business Tom Cruise, where he was a kid playing it cool.
Mm-hmm.
But that might have eclipsed some of the other performances. I mean, you didn't want somebody with too much dazzle, but you wanted somebody I felt a little more empathetic on screen. And again, I'm not trying to harsh on this actor.
Right.
I felt like the movie was fun and it worked for a lot of reasons, and that it felt like an ensemble piece. Roddy McDowall, what are you going to say bad about Roddy McDowall?
That's what I was going to say. About halfway through the movie, when he hooks up with Roddy McDowall, that's when it really takes off, because he's just so great in the movie.
Roddy McDowall is great, full stop. I think Roddy McDowall is doing a lot of... I didn't feel a lot of what Roddy McDowall was doing, but he told the story. And what I mean by that is, he plays a coward who is this sort of vain actor, B- C actor who found himself doing a bunch of like cheap vampire movies and then narrating a kind of, Lloyd Kaufman late night creature feature show called Fright Night. And I like that it ties it all together. And he gets roped into this because underneath all of his cowardice, he has a heart, and he wants to, he aspires, I think, to be the hero way deep down, to be the thing he's played in movies.
Yeah.
And all of that is clear in his performance, like when he's too afraid to go in the house, but then he thinks, oh, these kids are going to die if I don't, I need to do the right thing. And he mans up and he goes in. He tells the story of that on his face. I just didn't feel it.
Mm-hmm.
And what do you think? Did you watch Roddy McDowall's performance and you know what I mean by feel it? Like when you watch Tom Hanks, like you feel it. You feel the agony of him, like being like, I want to get home to my wife, but I also need to do my duty, even though it might kill me. And he decides to do his duty, and guess what? It kills him. But you feel it when you watch Tom Hanks do it. And I didn't feel it with Roddy McDowall.
I think there's a couple of scenes there where there's the one where he finally, Charlie goes to his apartment to try to convince him to help them. And he's packing up all of his things to leave, and he's very torn about, he just says, I'm sorry, I can't help you, and I felt like
he says, sorry, Charlie.
I'm sorry, Charlie. Yeah. But I felt like that resonated for me. I mean, one thing that I thought was interesting is, so I was thinking as I was watching it, I thought, I wonder if, was this just kind of a paycheck for Roddy McDowall? And actually in the little bit of reading that I did about it, the movie was specifically written for Vincent Price. And the name Peter Vincent comes from Peter Cushing and Vincent Price. And so the writer and the director had Vincent Price always in mind when he wrote this. And they approached him, and he, it was kind of late in his career, and he was basically kind of tired of doing horror movies and being typecast as that. So he turned it down, and one of the producers knew Roddy McDowall and said to the director, "Hey, what about Roddy McDowall?" And he said, "Yeah, I think that would be great." And they, according to what I read, Roddy McDowall was really into it. So it wasn't like he just it was just a paycheck thing. He very much liked the character. There's actually a sequel to this that's kind of hard to find, and Roddy McDowall is in that. And then they had planned to do a third movie, and the production people were remember the Menendez brothers that killed their parents, in like the 90s. Well, it was their dad was owned the production company, and it was in the pipeline to do a third one, and then after he died, things changed hands, and it didn't happen. But they said that Roddy McDowall had hoped to do a third, so he was very into the character. It wasn't like he was just phoning it in, or whatever. But
I didn't think he was phoning it in.
Mm-hmm.
I thought it was sort of I guess I thought it was sort of a directorial failing of.
And I was going to say it could be what's on the page as well,
Yeah, but it's more like because it walks the line between comedy and thriller and horror. And it's fun horror. It's like there's some genuinely like, oh, look at that scary, but it's a popcorn movie. It's not a movie like The Witch or a movie like, there are horror movies that try to really get under your skin. Like, I'm going to give you nightmares for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And there are those movies, and then there are other movies that's like, aren't horror movies fun? We got a really good one. Grab a soda and a popcorn and bring your date because this is going to be awesome. And this is one of those fun horror movies where the scares can be great, but it's fun. And so there's a lot of comedy in those kind of movies. And I felt like it was just a directorial thing of Roddy McDowall maybe not nailing all of the like what's a comic bit and what's a pathos bit and what's a, you know what I mean?
Sure.
There can be a lot of tight turns beat to beat. And I think it was more that, because I'm certainly not going to say Roddy McDowall doesn't have the chops, because that would be absurd. It's funny that you say Vincent Price. I thought Christopher Lee might have been a really interesting.
He would, obviously, he would be a good choice
because he has the vanity but also the gravitas. Like when he was really, I think what Roddy McDowall doesn't really have to me is the gravitas of a vampire hunter.
Right.
But if you had like a Christopher Lee who, like, when he rises to his full height and owns the like "Begone, spawn of darkness" or whatever, you would have bought that. You'd have been like, "Oh, that's why we brought this guy along," right?
Yeah, Roddy McDowall is in no way any kind of an intimidating guy or anything like that.
He's a caring, paternal, empathetic. Certainly can do comedy. And I bought the vein. But when I think of like vein, but like rises to the power of vampire hunter, I thought someone like Christopher Lee.
Sure. Because
he's very self-conscious, but he also does that. I mean, look at him in Saruman. Like he's Christopher Lee. He's amazing. And he would have been younger then, but he still would have been, a gentleman of a certain age.
Another thing that I read that goes along kind of with what you're saying is, so it was, first time director. They said they only did 2 or 3 takes on each scene. And they
first time director. Yeah.
Yeah. And they said that everyone was, he's Roddy McDowall, and, the other people were younger than him. And they said he was this wonderful guy. They all loved him. And they said he went around with a video camera and like just did like his own home movies, while they were on the set and stuff. But they said everybody was in awe of him. So I'm sure the director was probably in awe of him as well. So you probably
And
just
that's
did, here's a couple of takes. That was great, Roddy. Let's go
yeah.
on to the next thing.
And that's fun. That's a lot of fun, but that's not necessarily good for the movie.
Right. Yeah.
But I'm glad everybody had a great time. And again, I'm picking nits. I had a lot of fun. This is a fun movie. There's a reason why you see it come up in your queue. It's a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun. And I think that once you get to the back nine, like once you get to the second half, and they kind of hitch up their pants and they like, I don't have a choice, and they all go into the vampire's mansion for the final showdown.
Mm-hmm.
It gets really fun because they really start to unleash these 80s practical effects. They used a lot of the kind of melting technology, right? Like there's a wax hand that sort of reversed the camera where the hand sort of comes back together from goo, or they just had a ton of fun. The vampires take all different states. Like there's contact lenses, there's sort of different stages of, so evil turns into a wolf at one point, and he gets Roddy McDowall skewers him through the heart. And then there's this long sequence where he sort of turns back from, he's dying, and he turns back from wolf to boy. And there's got to be 6 stages of it, right? Where each stage has a different prosthetic, and it's sort of mewling and screaming and whimpering, and it goes on and on.
That was one part that I had totally forgotten about. I don't know why, but that's the one. It's all fun, but that was a genuinely kind of disturbing scene where he's dying. He's, like you said, he's kind of this half wolf, half boy, and that was, and Roddy McDowell's just sort of watching him die, and there's not anything that he can do, and he just kind of looks concerned,
but pitying. He's
pitying him. Yeah.
But the prosthetics are also pretty gross. Like the prosthetics are also, they're not designed to be like, this is the scary hybrid. It's like, it's the most Cronenberg, like kind of wretched, bulging, one bulbous eye. It's like they're really designed to be kind of gross things. And it's the performance of his sort of piteous screams that make it's not funny. Like it, but it goes on and on. And I marveled at that. I'm like, I guess you spent the money on these things. But again, I come back to first time director. I'm just like, how much of this do you put on the scale in terms of the whole thing? Because I feel like we have stopped the momentum of the story, and now we're spending time languishing here. And I remember I was eating a late night snack, and I had to kind of put my bowl down. I'm like, oh God.
Yeah, it's pretty gross. That's my only real criticism I would have of the movie. It's about an hour and 45 minutes. I think it could probably be trimmed down to an hour and a half and just move a little bit. It's not like it's a real slow burn, but there's just some little, you could cut a minute or two here and there, and I think get it down to an hour 30, and it would run a lot more smoothly.
And it doesn't all have to be action sequences either. I mean, I think the stuff between the vampire and Amy is the girlfriend's name?
Yes.
Is dynamite. And that's just great acting. That's just great acting. Like when there's chemistry on screen between this character and the other character, keep it. You don't have to cut that. That's interesting. Yeah. But there is some of the stuff goes on a little longer than it needs to. I think you're right. I think 15 minutes, and that doesn't sound like a lot, but in a film, that's significant. This would be a better movie at an hour and a half than it is in an hour 45.
Yeah.
That's not a deal breaker.
No. Again, it's not like it's a slow movie, it's always moving. Now, no. Amy, did you recognize Amy?
No, but she looked really familiar to me.
Did you ever watch Married with Children?
Yes.
She was the neighbor. The neighbor couple?
Oh, yeah.
She was the neighbor from Married with Children.
Oh yes. Well,
Because they
it's
did the sequel, and they have so the sequel's pretty good too. Not as good as this, but it's still pretty fun. And he goes, so it's things are kind of reversed. He goes to college, and he's gone through therapy, and he now is convinced through therapy that none of the stuff ever happened, that the guy was never a vampire, and so it again, he encounters more vampires, and I believe it's been a while since I've seen it, but Peter Vincent is now the one that it's like, yeah, there's vampires here, Charlie.
has to
And
come
it's
in.
like,
No, it's
yeah.
real. It
And
all
he's like, no,
happened.
no, that that never happened. I that was all in my mind. But so she is not. They have a new girlfriend because they tried to get her, but she was doing Married with Children, and she couldn't get out of it. For the film. So yeah.
Yeah, I had anticipated that wanting to talk more about the sort of dated acting style that I felt like I can't put my finger on it. I need to play clips of it, but something in the way that he delivers his lines is like, "Oh, come on, Amy, can't you see what I'm?" It just felt like an older Hollywood, like he had a acting coach at the time who was 65 and was like, "No, here's how you got to do it, kid." It felt in an 80s movie. It just felt stale somehow. Like that's not how people are approaching acting at the time when this film was. Does that make any sense, or am I just an actor being like,
No, I understand what you're saying, and I think you have. It seems like, especially with genre movies, you have, the current directors. They're all referencing whatever they love, whatever they grew up with. So this movie is obviously it's a little bit of a spoof, but it's not making fun, and it's a love letter to the old horror movies, because you've got a little bit of the foggy, the mansion and all that kind of a thing. So
sure?
I'm sure that Tom Holland was, you brought up Christopher Lee. I'm sure that Tom Holland was into the old Hammer horror films and things like that. So he's referencing a lot of that. So there might have been some influence as far as what the acting was like, in the 60s or the 50s or whatever. Whereas, now you have all these directors that they all grew up in the 80s and maybe the 90s, so they're
Right.
referencing everything that happened, that happened back then. So I'm sure it probably, and maybe it wasn't even intentional. Maybe it was just subconscious that, maybe he a little bit played more as a 50s or 60s character in an 80s film.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard to talk about without specific examples. The first half of the movie, I was waiting for there to be some fireworks, and so I was paying attention to stuff like that. And I don't know, once we got into the second half, and there's a whole, like, it's a circus of practical effects. So the Renfield character, he sort of melts, and it's like there's all this green slime coming out of his pant leg, and then he right, and he sort of devolves into a skeleton, and then he kind of explodes into dry bones, and
skull flies across the
you're just kind of like, what? Oh, wow, that was a sequence.
Yeah.
And when they get the vampire, like when the vampire gets sort of enraged and or terrified, his eyes sort of bulge out, and he's got the contacts, and we see a bunch of different kinds of vampire teeth, from like stiletto canines to when when the girlfriend first turns, she's the sort of sexy vampire with a lot of eye makeup and just has these wicked canines. But then when she gets a little rabid, her eyes kind of bug out, and she's got these crazier contacts, and they morph her whole face into this kind of maw of a bunch of jagged teeth.
They become much more animalistic, as they.
Yeah, and it's almost a werewolf movie, when he reverts back from wolf, but it's like a vampire can become a wolf, he can become a bat, he can become mist, he can
Yeah.
We just get this kind of salad of all of that stuff throughout. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to what happens when or why.
But it's all fun.
It's all fun.
And the effects look, for people who, anybody who hasn't seen this and they're into practical effects, there's some really great practical effects going on. There's a bat at the end, Jerry turns into a bat, and it's a little corny. But
Jerry.
Yeah. He's a very Jerry Dandridge. He just sounds like an accountant or something, a very unassuming name.
It's a funny name, Jerry Dandridge. Yeah, he turns into, but he doesn't turn it. It's like a bat creature. It's bat-ish. It's bigger than a bat. It's more prehistoric looking.
This
than
large
a bat.
monster head.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's great. It's original, and it's like some creature builder had fun making those effects, and it's fun to watch. And I love the practical stuff. I love it. Somebody had to get real specific in terms of designing and making that, and stuff went wrong in the making of it, so you had to solve those problems. And I just feel like that ends up in a kind of a magic on screen. Like, if it looks too much like garbage, you don't use it. But most of the time, you're sort of surprised with, like, wow, that looks great. Like, that's not what I wanted it to look like, but I actually really like the way that came out. And it takes on a life of its own. Whereas with CGI, you've basically got some designer building the stuff, and then they show it to the director, and the director either thumbs up or thumbs down it. And there isn't any collaboration. There isn't any space for something to go wrong. And no matter how baroque or convoluted the design is, it's all so controlled,
right?
That I feel like it doesn't give you. There's no room for your imagination to enter into play. It's like, look at this incredibly detailed thing I made for you to see. And I don't know, there's just nothing concrete for your mind to engage with, or no gaps for your brain to fill in,
Yeah. And I always feel like we're still not at the point with CG that it's totally real. They're getting better all the time, but it always seems to me like filmmakers overestimate the realness of it, because you watch these 80s movies with the practical effects, and it's not real when you're watching it. And even a lot of times and it doesn't seem realistic, but it's just, there's a weight and a depth and all of that to what's there, that it was an actual physical thing,
Yeah.
and they have to do different things to hide aspects of it, so they're not, and they hide things with lighting. Whereas CG, it's just like, we're just going to put it out there. And just so much of it still, I mean, you even watch the Marvel movies, that cost $200 or $300 million to make or whatever, and it still has this video game aspect to it. You know what I mean? Where it's still like, it doesn't look, it's like, oh, it looks good, but you're not fooled by it.
Particularly in those sequences where it's like the Avengers versus the army of generic looking space monkeys.
Yeah.
When it's just Tony Stark and Robert Downey Jr., in his CGI armor, his performance sells it. The armor looks cool, but you're watching his face and what's going on in the performance. When it's just a bunch of Avengers flying around and a bunch of space monkeys flying around, your brain disconnects, because there's nothing, there's no surprise to CGI, because it's 100% controlled. There's never, a bird taking a dump in the background of a CGI shot, because it's, you didn't film the world, right? It's all exists in a computer. So unless somebody designed that bird in there, which they don't, because it's more expensive, and takes more time, that doesn't exist. So there is no variable. There's no variable. And I think the best performers, when you see someone on camera and the performance really gets you, I think they've done the work and they've done the preparation and the cameras are rolling and they know the camera's there, but they surprise themselves with the particular texture in that take of the emotion as it hits them.
Mm-hmm.
It's new to them. And a great actor might be able to do it 50 takes in a row and cry every single time. But take by take is unique, even if they're doing the same delivery. The two takes are never precisely the same. And I think as humans, even if it's subconscious, we're very trained to recognize those tiny micro variations of all the little myriad muscles under our skin and around our eyes and mouth that convey subtext.
Mm-hmm.
And, CGI, you can do Warcraft, or you can do a movie where it's a full CGI thing of actual human faces. And it's amazing how good that has gotten.
Sure.
I just don't, until you have a true AI that can emulate human experience, you're not going to get a computer generated image that is as moving as the actual human face.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying we'll never get there. I'm just saying we're not there yet. And I don't know. I mean, is it cheaper to have a computer do it? Just get an actor. Like, that's part of the magic of movie making.
Yeah. And
That's that's what makes Jaws so great. The shark didn't work, so they had to come up with other scenes, and it's scarier.
Yeah, absolutely. And a film, and they've done other shark movies, but in a film today, they would show the shark would be doing backflips and stuff, and it's instead of this very subtle,
right? They'd make the shark the size of Moby Dick, and it's just like, why don't you try and make a movie about it could be a big shark, but a real shark. Real shark is scary. If you're in the water and a real shark is coming for you, that is scary. Try and capture that on film. That'd be terrifying.
Yeah.
I'm not dissing Jaws. I'm just saying that, like, some of the best stuff in Jaws, it's like Alien. The monster was so scary because you didn't see it very much.
Mm-hmm.
You saw it just enough to be terrified of, like, being afraid it was there, but not actually seeing it.
Now you have the kind of the flip side of that is John Carpenter's The Thing with the amazing effects in that. And they show you a ton. But then did you ever see the sort of prequel remake that they made in like 2011 or 2012 or something like that? Did you ever see it?
What was it called?
It's called The Thing. But it takes place. It's like right before the events of so it's about the,
it is also called The Thing?
Yeah. So it is The Thing. I'll tell you here what the year is. It's pretty good. I mean, it's
obviously haven't seen it. I saw the one with
2000. Yeah, it's just called The Thing, and it's 2011, but it's about the Norwegian crew leading up to the stuff with Kurt Russell. But so it's kind of a remake and kind of a prequel, but they did everything practically, and then the studio didn't think it would work for modern audiences, so they're like, you gotta do CGI stuff, and it's like,
is it the same aesthetic with all the like crazy little flailing tentacles?
Yeah,
they're not even tentacles; they're like cilia or something. They're like thousands of tiny little writhing,
Yeah, very much so. I mean, it's 2011. I mean, it's worth watching. It's not bad, but it's just all of it you watch and you're just like, I mean, it's just like Star Wars when you watch the special editions and it's like, okay, it's really easy to tell what the CGI spaceships are and what the model spaceships are, and the model spaceships look better, Yeah.
So they look like somebody actually built them.
Yeah.
They look like they exist.
And, you can even tell sometimes that they're models but like you said, they look like they exist
Right.
instead of
Well, I don't think
just
I'm
being
watching
something
a
that's weightless.
documentary.
Right,
I
right.
mean,
Yeah, yeah,
you know, I've got a plastic version of it at home that I fly around and pretend is the real thing. It's pretend. It's a movie.
yeah,
It's fun. I'm willing to suspend my disbelief. Give me something, give me Puppet Yoda. I don't need
yeah,
CGI Yoda.
yeah.
Puppet Yoda has a puppet artist manipulating. I don't know that Frank Oz did the puppet, but he certainly did the voice. Maybe he did the puppet. But Frank Oz is an excellent puppeteer. It might have been him doing the puppet. It would have been even better. But there's somebody alive
Hmm.
making the puppet alive. And there's somebody alive typing stuff into a computer to make the CGI. It's just it's a disconnect.
Sure.
The computer doesn't have any stake in it. The computer's not giving you a performance, right? So you're putting a leap of remove between a human being performing something and what you see on the screen.
I wonder if that's another thing where it's an age thing because we grew up with the practical effects. Kids that have always, CG has always been in the movies that they've watched. Is it more convincing to them than it is to us? I don't know.
I have no idea. We're running out of time here, so why don't we? I'd say recommended. Great October Halloweeny movie. Check it out. Fun popcorn, especially if you're into 80s. It's weird. It's a little all over the place, but I had a lot of fun watching it.
I'm glad you did because it's one of these. It's another of these where the first time I saw this was it came out in '85. I watched it at a friend's house on HBO in probably '86. So I was 13 or something like that at the time. So, this hit all the 13-year-old buttons at the time, but
Sure.
but I feel like it's obviously it worked for you, but I think it's something, you can watch as an adult. Again, I wonder, like, teenagers watching this today, would it work for them? Would they just think it was corny? I don't know, but
I don't know. But for our age, like, again, if you're into the 80s nostalgia, like, I love that I hadn't seen it. I was aware of Fright Night. I just never seen it.
mhm.
And I had a lot of fun, so if you're the kind of person that's like, yeah, I like all that stuff and I like what you guys have been talking about, I think you'll enjoy it. I
Oh,
do think
absolutely, yeah.
it's a little slow in the first half, but, stick with it.
Anyone who likes 80s movies but 80s horror, and like you, it was just one that they missed for whatever reason, I can't imagine not liking this. And this is kind of that perfect combination where it's kind of funny, it's kind of scary, it's it's a little gross, but it's never too gross. It's the acting all around is very good. It's not this Columbia released this, so this was a major studio.
Yeah.
It's not like some of these, old movies, and you go back and you're like, oh, that was kind of poorly made. It's fun, but
Yeah.
poorly made. This is a well-made film. This was actually the number 2. I was reading the number 2 highest grossing horror movie of the year. The second Nightmare on Elm Street was number 1, but this one was number 2.
Sure.
So.
Yeah, I agree. I think you feel the fact that it's a first time director a little bit. But it is a fun horror movie with genuinely engaging elements, and they raise the stakes. Like, you don't really expect the buddy to get turned, and you don't really expect the girlfriend to get turned.
Mhm.
And when those things happen, you're like, oh, snap. Like, I presume they're all going to make it out of this, but are they?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Absolutely.
Great. So we have not discussed what we're going to do next time, but I think we should call it, and then you and I can talk about it a little bit. Unless you have a strong lobby to make right now.
No, I don't.
Well, let's call it for right now. We both recommend you go out, if you haven't already, watch Fright Night, and we will.
If you have Prime, you can watch it for free on Prime. So,
yeah,
and a really great print. It it was remastered at some point. I'm sure it looks really good.
Yeah, that's a little perk for you there. Won't cost you anything extra if you're already an Amazon subscriber. And otherwise, be well, stay safe, have fun, tune in next time, and we will talk to you next week. Next week.